In the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC, the eastern Mediterranean world was in turmoil. Great Bronze Age powers were collapsing. The Hittite Empire had fallen, cities across the Levant were burning, and long-established trade networks were disintegrating. This upheaval, known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, created a domino effect of chaos. Amid this turmoil, waves of displaced peoples roamed in search of new lands and resources. Among them were the enigmatic Sea Peoples, a confederation of seafaring tribes whose sudden emergence is noted in Egyptian records. By the early 12th century BC, Egypt had managed to stand while other civilizations faltered. Pharaoh Ramses III, who reigned from 1186 to 1155 BC, now found his kingdom under severe pressure. A climactic confrontation between Egypt and the Sea Peoples was on the horizon, with the stability of the entire region hanging in the balance. This confrontation, known to history as the Battle of the Delta, is the first recorded naval battle in history. The term Sea Peoples itself is modern, derived from ancient Egyptian references to a coalition of invaders from the sea or from northern countries. Some names recorded by the Egyptians hint at far-off origins. For example, some scholars believe that one of the names indicates that one part of this coalition may have been from Sardinia in the western Mediterranean. Other groups possibly came from much closer by in the Aegean or Anatolia. Although many theories exist, no definitive evidence pinpoints where each group came from. What is clear is that by around 1200 BC, various tribes had banded together to both raid and seek new homes in the wealthy lands of the eastern Mediterranean. To the Egyptians, the Sea Peoples were a fearsome menace. They're depicted as well-armed warriors, some wearing intricate helmets, both factors indicating a high degree of sophistication in craftsmanship. They're depicted as arriving both by land, with wagons carrying families and belongings, and by sea, in open boats. These invaders weren't simply another army from a rival empire. They were whole populations on the move, possibly migrants looking for a new homeland rather than mere raiders. Egyptian accounts describe their onslaught as something akin to the land being struck by a tsunami. The force of these invading migrants was simply too great for anyone to withstand. It was against this tsunami that the pharaoh prepared to make his stand, with the fate of the Egyptian heartland hanging in the balance. Ramses, aware of the destruction that had befallen his neighbors, understood that an invasion of Egypt could be catastrophic. He took decisive action and marshaled Egypt's defenses. The pharaoh fortified key positions in the Nile Delta, deployed troops to the frontier region of southern Canaan, and prepared his navy for an impending battle. One arm of the Sea People's offensive came overland through the Levant. Ramses personally led his army in the Battle of Jahi in modern Lebanon, and won decisively, halting the land-based invaders. Meanwhile, the greater danger was approaching by sea, as a vast fleet carrying the bulk of the Sea Peoples set sail for the Egyptian delta, intending to land en masse. Ramses rushed back to the delta to face this seaborne invasion and prevent his nation from being overrun. Ramses planned to trap the Sea People's fleet before they could disembark onto Egyptian soil. Using the advantage of fighting on home territory and careful planning, he set up an ambush on the water. According to the inscriptions at Medinet Habu, the pharaoh allowed the enemy fleet to enter the Nile Delta's waterways unopposed. Once the Sea People's ships had sailed into the river's mouth, hidden Egyptian warships closed in behind them. At the same time, hundreds of Egyptian archers were stationed along the banks and on nearby ships, all with bows drawn and waiting. When the invaders reached the choke point of the delta, Ramses sprang his trap. At his signal, Egyptian archers unleashed a massive volley of arrows from both the shores and the decks of ships. The sudden barrage plunged the Sea Peoples into chaos. Under the hail of Egyptian arrows, enemy oarsmen and warriors fell, and their boats became vulnerable targets. When some invaders tried to steer toward the banks and land, they found the shore bristling with sharpened stakes planted to impede any landing. Caught off guard and suffering heavy losses, several of the Sea People's boats capsized or drifted uncontrollably in the Nile's channels. Seizing the moment, Ramses ordered his fleet to attack from the rear and flanks. The Egyptians were no great seafarers, which turned out to be a massive advantage in this naval showdown. The Egyptian warships were smaller and more agile in the delta channels, and rammed into the larger enemy ships that had difficulty maneuvering. Grappling hooks were thrown as Egyptian marines boarded the Sea People's vessels, and brutal hand-to-hand combat erupted on the decks. The invaders, already disarrayed by the arrow fire, now found themselves assaulted at close quarters, and many were cut down before they could regroup. Those who managed to scramble onto land were met by waiting Egyptian infantry who swiftly routed them. By the battle's end, the waters of the delta were said to be clogged with wreckage and bodies. Egyptian reliefs vividly depict the aftermath: enemy ships overturned or dragged ashore, and drowned or defeated warriors scattered along the water's edge. Ramses III's inscriptions boast of a total victory, claiming that the Sea Peoples were completely annihilated. While such royal accounts are prone to exaggeration, modern historians believe this depiction contains truth. Egypt's preparation and tactics had indeed crushed the invasion. The Battle of the Delta, fought circa 1175 BC, stands as history's earliest recorded naval battle and showcases Ramses' military leadership and strategic forethought at its finest. The Egyptian victory in the Battle of the Delta was a turning point. Ramses' success repelled the invaders and spared Egypt the fate that befell so many of its neighbors. Egypt emerged as one of the few civilizations to survive the end of the Bronze Age with its institutions intact. Had the Sea Peoples breached Egypt's defenses, the continuity of Egyptian civilization might have been broken. Instead, thanks to the pharaoh's actions, Egypt lived on and continued its dynastic legacy. Egyptian records mention no pursuit of the Sea Peoples beyond Egypt's borders, and it appears the pharaoh was content that his realm was secured. For Egypt, the Battle of the Delta was the crowning achievement of Ramses III's reign, earning him a reputation as the last great pharaoh of the new kingdom. However, the struggle against the Sea Peoples and other foes had strained Egypt's economy and military. The disruption of international trade and the costs of constant warfare left Egypt weaker in the long run. After his death, his successors faced internal unrest and economic difficulties. Egypt gradually withdrew from its former imperial territories and would never again reach the heights of power it had enjoyed in previous centuries. The ancient Romans had a term for the wild rage they perceived in their northern enemies: furor Teutonicus, meaning Teutonic or Germanic fury. This Latin phrase encapsulated the Roman belief in the extraordinary ferocity of the Germanic tribes. To Roman eyes, the Germanic warriors seemed to fight with a mad, berserker-like rage that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. In Roman literature, furor Teutonicus referred to the proverbial ferocity of the Teutons, a Germanic tribe, and by extension all Germanic peoples encountered by Rome. The phrase is attributed to the Roman poet Lucan in the 1st century AD, who first used it in his epic Pharsalia to describe what he saw as the defining trait of the Teutons. In Lucan's telling, this fury was almost otherworldly, a kind of battle madness that made the Germanic warriors exceptionally dangerous. The choice of words is telling, as furor in Latin implies not just anger, but a sort of crazed, uncontrolled wrath. This hints that the Romans viewed these warriors as possessed by an otherworldly lust for violence. This early literary usage cemented Führer Teutonicus as a shorthand for Germanic savagery, but also martial prowess. While Lucan may have given a name to the concept, the roots of this idea lay in real military encounters. Around the end of the 2nd century BC, the Roman Republic faced a dire threat from the north. A confederation of tribes, notably the Cimbri and the Teutons, migrated southwards, crashing into Rome's sphere in northern Italy, Gaul, and Hispania. In 113 BC at Neraea, a Roman army sent to ambush these migrating tribes was itself overwhelmed and defeated. The Romans documented a loss of 24,000 men in this encounter, nearly a complete wipe of their forces. Worse was to come in 105 BC, when Roman forces suffered a catastrophic loss at the Battle of Arosio. If classic sources are to be believed, the Germanic alliance fielded an army of 200,000 men, while the Romans fielded a force of 120,000 men. Whatever the correct number, what's not disputed is that the Teutons and the Cimbri ended up annihilating up to 12 Roman legions and their auxiliaries. Gaius Marius would eventually crush the migratory tribes a few years later, but despite this, the legends of the otherworldly fury of these wild men grew in the telling. If the Cimbrian War introduced Rome to the furor of Germanic tribes, the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD confirmed the enduring potency of that fear. In this infamous ambush, a coalition of Germanic tribes led by Arminius annihilated 3 Roman legions under Varus in the deep forests of Germania. Roman sources recount with horror how over the course of several days, the Germans methodically destroyed the entire Roman force, roughly 20,000 men, sparing almost no one. The slaughter halted Emperor Augustus's expansion into Germany and forced Rome into a permanent defensive stance behind the Rhine. The Führer Teutonicus seemed to have manifested again. To Roman eyes, the tribesmen emerged from the dark woods screaming battle cries, fueled by an untamable rage, and hacking the legions to pieces. They seemed completely impervious to pain, and really didn't seem concerned with anything beyond brutalizing their foes. This devastating defeat shook the Roman world to the very top. Suetonius writes that Augustus, upon hearing the news, wandered his palace in grief, crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." It's worth noting that not all Roman accounts were one-sided. Some observers also recognized organization and strategy among these fury-driven tribes. For instance, Arminius had actually served in a Roman auxiliary unit and used knowledge of Roman tactics to plan his ambush. Simply put, it's a detail that shows cold calculation, rather than some impulsive rage. Nevertheless, the lasting Roman memory of these clashes emphasized the dramatic elements, the howling war bands, the forest ambushes, and the near-superhuman endurance of their warriors. Modern historians point out that these Roman depictions were often propaganda and oversimplification. Romans like Julius Caesar didn't hesitate to use stereotypes of Germanic ferocity to justify preemptive strikes or territorial conquest. Caesar himself wrote that the Gauls feared the Germans for their size and ferocity, and he leveraged that fear to legitimize his campaigns across the Rhine. Modern historians, on the other hand, believe Germanic tribes had complex societies and varied warfare tactics, not just blind fury. But Roman audiences came to expect the trope of the raging barbarian, and writers obliged. Over time, the Führer Teutonicus stereotype became self-perpetuating. Later authors who never saw a Germanic battle still repeated the old tales of savage onslaughts, keeping the myth alive regardless of changing realities. As time went on, the Germanic tribes became more and more accustomed to Roman ways. They became much less like the wild men Marius crushed in the 2nd century BC, and much more similar to other people on the outskirts of the empire. Tacitus's Germania, published at the end of the 1st century AD, put a twist on the Furor Teutonicus as being a virtuous and manly quality. Tacitus praised certain qualities of the Germanic people such as their bravery, simplicity, strong family bonds, and love of feasting and fighting. Notably, he wasn't entirely intending to present this as an unbiased view of the Germanic peoples on the frontier. His agenda was partly to critique Roman society by holding up these barbarians as uncorrupted models of virtue. The Germanic people, with their Teutonic fury, were fighting for the pure love of combat and for their friends and family. This was intended to shame the Roman elite, the descendants of great warriors, many of whom were now more interested in material wealth than timeless Roman virtues. In the end, the legacy of Furor Teutonicus is a blend of reality and myth. It was born from real clashes on the battlefield, amplified by Roman writers into a larger-than-life stereotype, and then reinterpreted across generations into legend. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. On the vast Eurasian steppe in the 12th century, a child named Temujin was born under auspicious signs. Mongol legend says the baby emerged holding a blood clot in his fist, an omen that he would become a great warrior. He was likely born around 1162, though some accounts place it a few years earlier or later, near the Onan River in modern-day Mongolia. His birth name was reportedly given in honor of a rival chieftain his father had defeated in battle. Though born to a chieftain's family, Temujin's early life was anything but easy, and the boy who would be known as Genghis Khan first had to survive hardship, family betrayal, and exile. For decades, his world was one of clan feuds, unforgiving wilderness, and personal trials that would have broken many others. Temujin's father, Yesugei, was a minor Mongol chieftain with many enemies. When Temujin was about 9 years old, Yesugei was poisoned by rivals in an act of vengeance. With Yesugei dead, rival leaders cast out Yesugei's family, forcing Temujin's mother Huilun and 7 children to fend for themselves on the open steppe. The family then endured extreme poverty, with Huilun leading her children to survive on roots, berries, and fish instead of the meat and milk diet they had once known. Struggling to survive, the family also suffered internal strife. Temujin's older half-brother Begter tried to dominate the household, causing bitter conflict. Eventually, Temujin and his younger brother cut down Begter rather than submit to his bullying. This grim act of fratricide, born of desperation, was later omitted from official histories, but is frankly described in the Mongols' secret history. With no powerful allies left, hostile clan members soon seized the teenage Temujin, clamped a wooden collar around his neck, and held him captive. Even in bondage, Temujin refused to accept defeat. One night he made a daring escape, knocking down his guard and fleeing into the darkness. Hunted by his captors, he hid in rivers and thickets. At one point, a local man, moved by the fugitive's plight, risked his own life to help Temujin hide, and then slip away safely. Such loyalty from a stranger made a deep impression on Temujin. It showed that through courage and charisma, he could inspire others to follow him. By his mid-teens, Temujin had survived abandonment, betrayal, and imprisonment, experiences that steeled his will and taught him the value of alliances. Free and determined, Temujin gradually gathered a small band of followers. One early companion, a youth named Borchu, joined in to help the future Great Khan chase down some horse thieves, afterward pledging himself as a loyal follower. With a few loyal allies by his side, Temujin regained a foothold in Mongol politics. Around the age of 16, he turned to an alliance from his childhood: marriage. He married Burda, the young woman to whom he had been betrothed years before, who had faithfully awaited his return, thereby cementing a bond between their families and tribes. Burta's dowry was a valuable sable fur coat, which Temujin offered as a gift to Togrul, known as Ong Khan, of the Karait tribe. Togrul, who had been Yesugei's friend, was so impressed that he accepted Temujin as a foster son and ally. This alliance soon proved vital. Not long after, the Merkit tribe, seeking revenge for Hölin's long-ago abduction, attacked Temujin's camp at night and abducted Burta. Faced with this crisis, Temujin appealed to his two strongest allies, Togrul and Jamuka, a childhood friend with whom he had sworn brotherhood. Both men answered his call, and with their combined forces, Temujin attacked the Merkit, defeated them, and rescued Burta. Not long after, Burta bore a son, Jochi, and Temujin accepted him as his own, despite paternity rumors. The successful rescue of his wife greatly boosted his standing among the steppe tribes. Many more warriors, heartened by his growing fame, flocked to his banner. For a time, Jamuka remained at Temujin's side, and in 1286 Temujin's followers boldly proclaimed him Khan, effectively recognizing him as an independent leader. According to one account, a shaman then declared that the sky god Tengri had destined Temujin to rule the world, a prophecy that thrilled his followers and unnerved his rivals. This rising prominence, however, planted the seeds of a future conflict with Jamuka. It was not long before Temujin's relationship with Jamuka turned from friendship to rivalry. Jamuka, from a proud aristocratic lineage, grew resentful as Temujin's influence and unorthodox merit-based leadership style expanded. Temujin promoted allies for their loyalty and talent rather than aristocratic birth, a shocking break from tradition that drew more supporters to him but enraged nobles like Jamuka. Their alliance broke apart, and in 1187 they clashed in open warfare. The decisive battle took place at Dalan Baljut, where Jamuka's forces defeated Temujin, forcing him to flee and regroup. Over the next decade, Temujin lay low and rebuilt his strength, and about 10 years later, he re-emerged stronger than ever. Little is known about this period, but it's speculated that he was able to tear off a significant contingent of Jamuka's men. After all, going with the future Great Khan offered significant growth opportunities for men who weren't of any particular noble status. With Jamuka, everything came down to your lineage, as it always had. It only makes sense that the most talented non-noble tribesmen who were pledged to Jamuka would drop him for Genghis Khan and the opportunity to improve their lot in life. Indeed, many of the Great Khan's most respected generals would end up being men of common birth. He even faced his former patron Togrul and defeated him in battle, proving that not even a one-time mentor could stop his rise. The final obstacle to Temujin's supremacy was Jamuka. In 1204, Temujin's forces crushed the powerful Naiman tribe with whom Jamuka had allied. Jamuka fled, but soon his own men betrayed him and delivered him into Temujin's hands. These traitors had assumed they were in for a big reward, and in a way, they weren't wrong. It just wasn't the sort of reward they were hoping for. Demonstrating his code of loyalty, Temujin eliminated those traitors for betraying their lord, who was, after all, still his sworn brother, despite their bitter conflicts. As for Jamuka, Temujin offered mercy on the condition that he serve him, but Jamuka refused. According to the secret history of the Mongols, Jamuka responded, quote, "There cannot be two suns in the sky, nor two Khans ruling the earth." With that, Jamuka was granted an honorable death, and Temujin had become the paramount ruler of the Mongol steppe. In 1206, a great council of all Mongol chiefs from across the steppe, a Kurultai, proclaimed Temujin as the supreme ruler of a unified Mongol nation. He was formally given the title Genghis Khan, often interpreted to mean universal ruler. And that's the official story. But of course, it does remain somewhat of an open question how accurate this narrative is. Our knowledge of Genghis Khan's early life comes primarily from a 13th century Mongolian text called The Secret History of the Mongols, mentioned earlier. This remarkable chronicle offers the most complete account of Temujin's youth from the Mongols' own perspective. Fittingly, its title includes the word secret, because originally only the Mongol royal family and those given special favor were allowed to read it. It blends factual history with legend. For example, tracing Temujin's ancestry to a mythical wolf and noting prophetic signs at his birth. Written for the Mongol royal family, the secret history even includes unflattering details that later official histories left out, such as Temujin's fatal ambush on his half-brother. Historians consider the secret history indispensable but approach it with caution. It's the only near-contemporary Mongol source on Genghis Khan's early life, and so many events, especially private or minor incidents, can't be confirmed by outside records. Some aspects of its narrative likely contain bias or exaggeration intended to glorify the royal family. Other sources from the 13th century, written by Persian and Chinese historians, provide additional information, but were composed years later by outsiders. However, these histories focus on what happened after the Great Khan burst onto the world stage. Ultimately, without the secret history, the story of Temujin's early struggles and rise would be a complete unknown. By combining this precious Mongol chronicle with other records from the period, scholars today can roughly trace the rise to power of one of history's most influential people. Imagine the scene in 1566. In the busy Baltic port of Lübeck, townsfolk gathered by the Trave River to witness the launch of a truly awe-inspiring ship. This vessel was the Adler von Lübeck, German for Eagle of Lübeck, a galleon so large and imposing that it captured the imagination of all who saw it. Built by the prosperous Hanseatic city during the height of its maritime power, the Adler von Lübeck was intended to be a flagship like no other. Measuring around 256 feet from stern to bow and displacing an estimated 3,000 tons, it ranked among the largest ships in the world upon completion. Its towering masts and broad decks symbolize the ambitions of Lübeck and the Hanseatic League in an era when control of the seas meant wealth and influence. The saga of the Adler von Lübeck offers a window into an era of ambitious naval endeavors and shifting fortunes on the high seas. The ship was built at Lübeck's shipyards with craftsmanship befitting its grand scale. Construction began in 1565, and by March 1566, the colossal galleon was ready to launch. Building such a leviathan required vast quantities of materials, hundreds of oak timbers for the hull, tall pine trunks for masts, and tons of iron for fittings and cannons. It was a four-masted vessel with masts rising 200 feet above the waterline. The hull was stout and broad, built to support multiple cannon decks and the weight of heavy ordnance. Designed as a floating fortress, the Adler could carry roughly 1,000 men, including about 350 sailors and a further 650 soldiers, to operate the ship and its weapons. Those weapons were staggering for the time. The galleon was outfitted with 138 cannons of various sizes. These ranged from small cannons for close defense to massive 48-pounders capable of smashing enemy hulls. Few ships in the 16th century could rival such firepower or sheer size. The Adler von Lübeck was a product of turbulent times in Northern Europe. Its construction was sparked by the Northern Seven Years' War, which ran from 1563 to 1570. This was a conflict pitting Sweden against a coalition of the Danish crown, the city of Lübeck and her Hanseatic satellites, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Control of Baltic trade routes was at stake, and as a leading Hanseatic port, Lübeck had a vested interest in protecting its commerce from Swedish fleets and privateers. The Adler was envisioned as a formidable convoy escort, essentially a guardian for merchant ships sailing the Baltic and North Seas. It was rare for a city-state to field a warship of such size. This bold undertaking was a testament to Lübeck's extreme wealth and determination to safeguard its maritime lifeline. Despite the ship's fearsome potential, fate had other plans. By the time the Adler was completed and fully fitted out, peace negotiations were already underway between Lübeck's alliance and Sweden. The war ended with the Treaty of Stettin in 1570 before the ship ever fired a shot in anger. Having never seen combat, the Grand War Galleon suddenly found itself without a war to fight. In the years that followed, it was repurposed from man-of-war to merchantman, converted into a cargo ship to carry goods on long-distance trade routes, including voyages to the Iberian Peninsula. When the Adler von Lübeck was launched, it gained a reputation as the largest ship afloat. Contemporary observers marveled at its dimensions, and later historians often called it the biggest ship in the world of its time. In truth, it was certainly among the very largest vessels built in the 16th century. Only a handful of other ships even came close to its size. For example, earlier in the 1500s, the Portuguese galleon São João Baptista and Scotland's great ship Great Michael were considered gigantic in their day. Yet both were significantly smaller than the Adler in tonnage and length, with the São João Baptista tonnage being up to 1/3 less than the Adler von Lübeck. The largest of the famed Chinese treasure ships of the early 15th century might have rivaled the ship. However, by the time the Eagle kept watch over the Hanseatic fleet, no other vessel on any sea anywhere in the world could eclipse its impressive measurements. Not until well into the 1600s would warships be built that could rival or exceed the Adler's dimensions, showing just how extraordinary this 1660s galleon truly was. It's necessary to consider the other ships that were afloat at the same time as the Adler to truly understand how imposing this was, and why it was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Sweden's heavy warship Mars, which was launched in 1564, was 158 feet, with about 1,800 tons of displacement. Despite the impressive dimensions, it was considerably smaller than the Adler in both size and firepower. Likewise, when the Spanish Armada sailed against England in 1588, the largest galleons in that fleet were around 1,000 tons at most, only about 1/3 of the Adler's tonnage. After its brief stint as a military flagship without a war, the Adler von Lübeck spent the rest of its days in civilian service. Following the peace of 1570, it was refitted as a merchant vessel and put to work hauling cargo between the Baltic and the Atlantic. For over 2 decades, the great ship plied the seas in relative peace, carrying goods between northern Europe and destinations like Spain and Portugal. Her heavy cannons were removed to make way for more cargo, as the former war galleon took on a humbler but profitable role in trade. By the late 1580s, time and the elements had taken their toll on the ship, and the high cost of maintaining such a huge vessel was hard to justify. By 1588, coincidentally the same year the Spanish Armada met its defeat, the aging Adler was retired and broken up for scrap. Its timbers and ironwork were repurposed, ending the life of a ship that had once been the pride of the powerful Hanseatic League. Though the Adler von Lübeck never saw the battles it was built for, its legacy endures as a remarkable feat of naval engineering. It's also a testament to the sheer influence and economic power of this North German city. Despite having a population of no more than 25,000 people, Lübeck was able to fund and maintain the largest ship of the era, while also maintaining a large naval fleet overall. Imagine dawn breaking over medieval Japan, revealing the silhouettes of mounted warriors assembling under a local lord's banner. This iconic image of the samurai, Japan's warrior class, evokes ideals of valor and honor. But the story of their rise isn't a single dramatic event, but rather a gradual evolution that historians are still struggling to fully comprehend. Over centuries, provincial fighters grew into a distinct class that would come to dominate Japan and become one of the most famous warrior classes in all of history. In the late 8th century, Japan's imperial court modeled its military on China's system of peasant conscripts. This approach proved impractical, partly because Japan lacked the massive imperial bureaucracy of the Chinese state. Farmers often evaded service without any consequences, and distant provinces were hard to control. By 792 AD, the court abolished universal conscription, effectively disbanding the national army. With no standing army, security fell to local landowners and officials, and this shift marked the genesis of a new warrior class. By the mid-9th century, noble families and great temples were hiring guards and forming private militias to protect their tax-free estates, known as shuan, from bandits and rival claimants. The court, facing rebellions on its frontiers, found it expedient to commission regional strongmen for help. Early military leaders were often descendants of emperors or noble clans sent out as provincial governors. Two families in particular, the Minamoto and the Taira, boasted imperial lineage but earned fame through force of arms. They and other clan chieftains built networks of fighting men bound to them by personal loyalty and reward. Initially, these provincial warriors were seen as upstarts by the refined courtiers of Kyoto. In the elegant capital, aristocrats wrote Chinese poetry and viewed themselves as the pinnacle of culture, while beyond the city, armed landowners dealt with the gritty realities of governing. The imperial court's reliance on these warriors meant that military service became entwined with estate management. Landholders would grant a portion of their estate to a trusted fighter in exchange for protection, creating a patron-vassal relationship. Over time, such arrangements became hereditary, and by the 10th century, the central government's influence in the provinces had significantly waned. Private estates spread across the land, each backed by its own band of warriors, and the authority of Kyoto over these far-flung domains grew increasingly tenuous. A striking early example of samurai assertiveness was the revolt of Taira no Masakado in 939 AD. A provincial magnate in the Kanto region, Masakado quarreled with local rivals and eventually declared himself the new emperor of the eastern provinces. He seized control of several territories, a shocking challenge to Kyoto's authority. The court put a bounty on his head, and within months, Masakado was hunted down and slain by other samurai loyal to the government. His rebellion, the first of its kind, demonstrated both the bold ambitions of regional warlords and the reality that only other warriors could stop them. Even in failure, Masakado's actions showed that the samurai were increasingly powerful and dared to openly defy the imperial order. In reality, as we will see, it may be that his mistake was simply that he declared himself emperor. Through the 10th and 11th centuries, the imperial court continued to lose grip on distant provinces. High officials in Kyoto became even more inwardly focused, with most attention being paid to courtly ceremonies and religious observances. These withdrawn aristocrats continued to accept their slide from a Chinese-style bureaucratic administrative government to a completely decentralized state only loosely held together. The great civilian aristocratic clans like the Fujiwara still held lofty titles, but they depended on warriors to actually keep the peace in the hinterlands. By the mid-12th century, samurai clans had become crucial players in the capital's affairs. The samurai as a class had become extremely powerful, but certain factions within the class wanted more direct and formalized recognition of their power. In 1156, a dispute over imperial succession, the Hogan Rebellion, saw Taira and Minamoto warriors backing rival claimants to the throne. By way of reminder, both the Taira and Minamoto clan were descendants of the imperial household, a fact which helped draw warriors to their respective banners. This is also one factor that led to them having support amongst factions of Kyoto aristocrats. The rebellion ended with victory for the faction led by Taira no Kiyomori, who emerged as the power broker in Kyoto. 3 years later, in 1159, Kiyomori thwarted a new plot against him in the Heiji Rebellion by the Minamoto clan. He executed his Minamoto rivals and exiled the defeated heir, a youth named Minamoto no Yoritomo, to a remote province. I may shock you here, but Kiyomori was born about 9 centuries before the premiere of Breaking Bad and didn't have an opportunity to watch the program. If he had, he may have taken Mike Ehrmantraut's words about the dangers of half measures to heart. This exiled Minamoto heir, who Kiyomori granted leniency after eliminating a large portion of his clan, would one day grow up into one of the most important people in Japanese history. For now, though, Kiyomori took a victory lap, and for the first time, a samurai warlord had become the undisputed master of the imperial government. Kiyomori reached the height of influence by marrying his daughter into the imperial family and installing his infant grandson as emperor. Although he never took the title of shogun, Kiyomori effectively controlled Japan, blending the roles of court noble and military leader. He maintained the facade of imperial rule, taking high ranks and governing in the emperor's name, but his ascent showed that warriors were willing to fully eclipse the civil nobility. Many courtiers resented this upstart's rule, yet significantly, Kiyomori still sought legitimacy from the existing order, even as he dominated it, indicating that the samurai's authority was still couched in service to the throne. In essence, he laid the foundation for a government where a member of the samurai class called the shots despite being officially nothing more than a mere servant of the emperor. Kiyomori's dominance would not go unchallenged. In 1180, simmering resentment against Taira rule ignited the Genpei War, which ran from 1180 to 1185. Minamoto no Yoritomo, now grown and determined to restore his clan's fortunes, raised a banner of rebellion in the eastern provinces. He rallied samurai who opposed the Taira, and civil war swept the country. After 5 years of fierce battles, fought from the plains around Kyoto to the far western sea, the Minamoto forces crushed the Taira. The conflict culminated in 1185 at the naval battle of Dan no Ura, where Kiyomori's clan was annihilated. The Taira clan, which just decades ago had been gleefully destroying the Minamoto, had now been completely eliminated, including the infant emperor and grandson of Kiyomori. Yoritomo had very clearly learned the lesson of allowing a young potential future rival to live. Minamoto no Yoritomo emerged as Japan's supreme military leader, and the half measure employed by Kiyomori was now paying dividends for the Minamoto clan rather than the Taira. Instead of seizing the throne for himself, he established a new seat of power in the east, at Kamakura, heralding the dawn of formalized samurai-led government. Whereas Kiyomori had been content exercising power informally, Yoritomo built the institutions that would legitimize the ascent of the samurai class. In 1292, Yoritomo obtained the imperial commission as the shogun, or military governor, formally legitimizing his rule. He founded the Kamakura Bakufu, a shogun-led military government based in his stronghold of Kamakura. This new regime didn't abolish the imperial court in Kyoto. The emperor remained on his throne as a revered figurehead, while the shogun now pulled the political strings. Real power had completely shifted into the hands of the samurai, but they continued to rule in the emperor's name to preserve an appearance of continuity. Under the Kamakura government, Yoritomo appointed trusted samurai to positions of power throughout the provinces. These officials were empowered to collect taxes, administer justice, and enforce order, functions once managed by imperial governors. In this way, the samurai class took charge of day-to-day governance across Japan, while the Kyoto court's direct influence in local affairs dwindled to almost nothing. Despite this, imperial provinces continued to exist, at least on paper, but they were, in essence, just titles given out by the imperial court to maintain the appearance that they were in control. The rise of a warrior government also reshaped samurai ideals. As de facto rulers, samurai leaders developed their own codes and norms. Initially, the Kamakura shogunate had no legal basis to conduct their own trials, since all legal authority lay with the emperor's administration. During this period, the military simply conducted trials without any legal basis for doing so, leading to significant displeasure over arbitrary justice. In 1232, Yoritomo's successors issued the Joi Code, a legal framework for samurai society that emphasized proper procedure, feudal loyalty, and justice among warriors. Honor and loyalty became cornerstone virtues. A samurai's reputation now hinged on service to his lord and on steadfastness in battle. The samurai increasingly viewed themselves as the guardians of the nation, a privileged class with a duty to maintain order and protect the land. The Kamakura period also tested the samurai's commitments, both domestically and against foreign threats. The most significant trials came with the Mongol invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281. The warriors of Kamakura, fighting in the name of the shogun and emperor, repelled the invading Mongol forces, aided by typhoons that struck the enemy fleets. Though the nation was saved, these exhausting campaigns strained the shogun's treasury. Because no new lands were won, many samurai received no rewards, breeding discontent in some quarters. Nonetheless, the successful defense against a formidable foreign power reinforced the samurai's self-image as the protectors of Japan. The 14th century brought new upheaval that transformed the samurai's role once again. The Kamakura shoguns themselves had long fallen under the influence of the Hojo clan, which left Japan in a very odd legal situation. Formally, the country was governed by the emperor, who had delegated authority to the Minamoto clan in their roles as military governors. But in actuality, real power lay with the shadowy Hojo clan, who governed through the Minamoto, who were in turn governing through the emperor. In 1333, Emperor Go-Daigo rallied disaffected warriors and overthrew the Kamakura shogunate, temporarily restoring direct imperial rule. This brief period, known as the Kenmu Restoration, saw the court attempt to govern without a shogun. However, Go-Daigo's policies alienated many samurai who felt their interests were ignored. Just 2 years later, one of Go-Daigo's chief allies, Ashikaga Tokoji, turned against him. Tokoji seized Kyoto in 1336 and installed a rival emperor while Go-Daigo fled south. Tokoji then declared himself shogun, establishing the Ashikaga shogunate in the imperial capital, ushering in the Muromachi period. During this period, the country was plunged into division. A northern court, backed by the Ashikaga shoguns, and a southern court, loyal to Go-Daigo's line, each claimed legitimacy. Samurai lords took sides, but many shifted allegiance opportunistically to advance their own position. For over 50 years, the land was torn between these two courts. The schism ended in 1392 when the southern court finally capitulated, reuniting the monarchy. Notably, almost all of the movers and shakers of this era were from the samurai class, indicating that they had truly achieved supremacy in affairs of the state. During the Muromachi period, from 1336 to 1573, real power became highly decentralized. Regional samurai lords, called daimyo, operated with considerable autonomy, ruling their domains as semi-independent fiefs while only loosely obeying the shogun. Some shoguns, notably Ashikaga Yoshimitsu in the late 14th century, managed to assert influence and presided over a cultural golden age, blending warrior and aristocratic traditions. Tea ceremonies, no drama, and ink painting flourished under samurai patronage, indicating how much the once rough-edged warriors had absorbed high culture. But such periods of stability were brief. In 1467, the fragile order shattered. A succession dispute between powerful clans erupted into the Onin War, running from 1467 to 1477, which engulfed Kyoto in violence and destruction. This conflict marked the complete collapse of Ashikaga authority. In its wake, Japan entered the Sengoku, or Warring States era, which would become one of the most famous periods of Japanese history. This is the period that would give us legendary names such as Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, and more. Feudal unity gave way to fragmentation, as dozens of daimyo warlords fought incessantly for land and supremacy. In this brutal environment, the samurai's role shifted to perpetual warfare. The ideals of loyalty and honor remained in rhetoric, but pragmatism often ruled the day, with alliances being made and broken as necessary. By the mid-16th century, the samurai class had been both diversifying and consolidating under the strongest warlords, setting the stage for a new unification to come. Modern historians have added nuance to the traditional narrative of the samurai's rise. The popular image of a decadent court toppled by virtuous samurai oversimplifies a complex transition. In reality, the warrior's ascent to power was gradual and frequently cooperative with the existing aristocracy. Many early samurai, including Yoritomo and his peers, sought validation from the imperial court, even as they gained autonomy. Notably, the Bushido Code, often thought of as an ancient, unchanging samurai creed, wasn't formally codified in medieval times. The legend of Bushido as a rigid code of honor obeyed by all samurai began to grow in the centuries of peace in the Edo period. These samurai, who had since become aristocratic administrators in their own right, began to idealize the conduct of their great ancestors. Medieval samurai, though valuing loyalty and honor, were pragmatic about survival and power. Rather than viewing the samurai as a monolithic band of noble swordsmen, modern scholarship portrays them as a diverse group of warriors navigating the political realities of their era. This perspective doesn't diminish their achievements, but it places their legendary conduct in a realistic context. The story of the founding of the samurai is still actively being researched and written by scholars to this day. Their rise from provincial enforcers to the ruling class illustrates how power in Japan shifted from a Chinese style to a feudal style of rule through iron and might. It was a response to necessity, the court needed protection, and an outcome of opportunity seized by those skilled in war. Over time, the samurai built new institutions and philosophies to legitimize and guide their rule. This is a testament to how history sometimes unfolds, not in sudden leaps, but in gradual turns. One day, after centuries of gradual change, the ones who once served have become the ones who rule, and a new chapter of history begins. The samurai, who started out as the rough provincial warriors for the Kyoto aristocrats, would, centuries later, be wearing fine silks, conducting tea ceremonies, and composing Chinese poetry. While historians are still working out the full details of their rise, at present what we can say is ultimately the result was the same as it ever was. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, don't forget to check out my other channels, my podcast, and my merch store by clicking the links in the description. For over a century, treasure hunters and historians alike have been captivated by the tale of Admiral Alexander Kolchak's lost gold. In the chaos following the Russian Revolution, a vast fortune in gold bullion, once the pride of the Tsar's treasury, seemingly vanished amid the chaos. Admiral Alexander Vasilyevich Kolchak was a prominent leader of the White Movement, the anti-Bolshevik forces, during the chaos following the Russian Revolution. Before the revolution, Kolchak was a celebrated naval officer in the Imperial Russian Navy. He served with distinction in the Russo-Japanese War and the Great War, and also earned a reputation as an Arctic explorer. After the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, Russia plunged into civil war, pitting the Communist Red Army against various anti-Bolshevik White armies. In this upheaval, Kolchak emerged as a key figure in Siberia, backed by Britain, France, the United States, and Japan, who hoped he could topple the Red Menace. By late 1918, Kolchak had taken control of a provisional anti-Bolshevik government in Omsk, Siberia, proclaiming himself the supreme ruler of Russia. His rule was authoritarian and military-backed, seen by supporters as a last hope for the old order, and by his enemies as a reactionary strongman. This context, with foreign intervention and shifting front lines across the vast Eurasian steppe, set the stage for Kolchak's dramatic rise and fall, as well as the story of the gold. Before the revolution, Imperial Russia held one of the largest gold reserves in the world. These reserves, comprising the wealth of the Tsars and state, were immense. Over 1 billion gold rubles by 1917, an amount then unrivaled globally. During the Great War, as German armies threatened Petrograd, the once and future St. Petersburg, the imperial government transferred much of the gold eastward for safekeeping. By 1918, a huge cache of gold bullion and coins had been stored in the city of Kazan on the Volga River. In August 1918, anti-Bolshevik forces, including units of the Czech Legion and White Russian troops, captured Kazan and seized the gold. This treasure, comprising not only Russian gold coins, but also foreign coins and gold bars, was estimated at about 645 million gold rubles in value. To put this in physical terms, this was 490 tons of gold, an amount that would be valued today at over $50 billion. By November 1918, Admiral Kolchak had taken power in Omsk, and the precious hoard was delivered into his custody. The transfer of such wealth was a boon to Kolchak's regime. It provided the funds he desperately needed to purchase supplies from abroad. An audit in mid-1919 confirmed Kolchak's government held approximately 650 million rubles in gold. This was essentially the core of the former Tsarist bullion reserve, though this had been bolstered with further seizures of wealth along the way. Controlling this gold also gave Kolchak's Siberian administration significant clout among Russia's allies. The admiral's possession of the imperial gold was a cornerstone of his authority and symbolically represented the gilded nest egg of continuity with the old Russian state. But this giant golden nest egg would, naturally, attract significant negative attention as well. By late 1919, the fortunes of the Russian Civil War turned decisively against the Whites. Kolchak's armies, battered by the Red Army's offensives, were in disarray and retreating eastward through Siberia. Omsk, Kolchak's capital, fell to the Bolsheviks in November 1919, forcing him to flee east along the Trans-Siberian Railway, with the bulk of the gold reserve loaded on armored trains. The train's journey was slow and perilous, complicated by harsh winter and the volatile political situation. The Czechoslovak Legion, a force of Czech and Slovak soldiers who had been fighting in Russia and controlled segments of the railway, played a pivotal role. The Czechoslovaks had earlier supported the Whites, but by late 1919 their primary goal was to secure passage home. As Kolchak's gold train moved toward Irkutsk in Siberia, the Czechoslovak Legion effectively held the key to the railway, and thus to Kolchak's fate. In December 1919, Kolchak's train was halted at Nizhnudinsk, not far from Irkutsk. At this time, Irkutsk had fallen under the control of a local anti-Kolchak Socialist Revolutionary Committee, which unsurprisingly was opposed to Kolchak. Under pressure and isolated, Admiral Kolchak agreed to relinquish power. He named White General Anton Denikin as his successor and attempted to place his remaining troops under Grigory Semenov's command. The latter man, the powerful leader of the Transbaikal Cossack host, would play a significant role in the legend surrounding this gold. Crucially, Kolchak placed himself under the protection of the French and British military missions and trusted the Czechoslovak Legion to guarantee his safe passage. It turned out that this trust was misplaced, and these Czechs and Slovaks, on the other side of Eurasia, had no real goal except to return home to their families. On January 14, 1920, the Czechoslovak Legion, eager to broker a deal for their own exit, handed Kolchak over to the local authorities in Irkutsk, despite promises. By early February 1920, Kolchak's tragic fate was sealed. He was cut down by firing squad in Irkutsk on February 7, 1920. Meanwhile, the victorious Bolsheviks obtained a huge prize. The Czechoslovak command, in exchange for their freedom to leave Siberia, turned over vast sums of gold and currency to the Reds. It's been estimated to be about 400 million rubles worth of gold, which accounted for a large chunk of the imperial reserve that Kolchak still carried. The Soviet authorities rejoiced at this windfall, which would help fund the fledgling Soviet state's post-war recovery. However, a significant portion of the gold was missing. Roughly 250 million rubles worth couldn't be accounted for in the transfer. The disappearance of this remaining treasure is what gave birth to the enduring mystery of Kolchak's gold. The question of what became of the missing 250 million rubles in gold has fascinated researchers and spawned countless theories. Some explanations are well documented by historians, while others are more speculative. According to the mainstream narrative, it's likely that no great treasure actually lies hidden. Much of the quote-unquote missing gold was expended, embezzled, or otherwise dispersed during the conflict. For instance, Admiral Kolchak had used substantial funds for military procurement and payroll while in power. Another large portion was sent abroad. Kolchak's government placed about 150 million rubles worth of gold in foreign banks as collateral for loans. Those funds were largely consumed repaying Western creditors and financing the anti-Bolshevik cause abroad. In addition, at least one white warlord simply openly stole part of the hoard and used it for their own purposes. Grigory Semenov, the Transbaikal Cossack commander in Siberia, intercepted and seized a train carrying approximately 40 million rubles in gold in September 1919. Semenov used that gold to fund his own forces against the Bolsheviks, and none of it was recovered. Other portions he simply kept for himself and distributed to his men in exchange for loyalty, which seems on point for a modern-day steppe warlord. When all these expenditures and thefts are tallied, they account for nearly the entire missing amount. Despite these grounded accounts of what happened, other theories continue to persist. One long-standing rumor accuses the Czechoslovak Legion of making off with a share of the gold during their trek home. Kolchak's former finance minister Vladimir Novitsky claimed the Czechs stole tens of millions of rubles of the reserve. Supposedly, this was later used to found a bank in Czechoslovakia with the illicit proceeds. Modern historians have found no solid evidence linking any Czech bank to Kolchak's bullion, casting doubt on this tale. Another famous legend holds that a portion of the gold was lost in the depths of Lake Baikal. According to this story, one of the gold trains derailed along the shore of this lake during the chaos, and several train carriages full of gold plunged into the lake's abyss. This incredibly deep lake, which despite its relatively small surface area contains 20% of the world's unfrozen fresh water, may hold billions in gold. In recent decades, Russian expeditions with mini-submarines have probed Lake Baikal's depths. They've indeed discovered wreckage of train cars and even boxes of ammunition on the lakebed, which is physical evidence that a train did crash there during the time period. In 2010, explorers found fragments of railway carriages and reported shiny metal objects that resembled gold bullion near one crash site. These findings fueled excitement, but no confirmed gold has ever been recovered from Baikal, and skeptics point out that any substantial treasure in the lake remains unproven. That said, some have speculated that it may have worked its way into the pockets of politically powerful people in Russia. Yet another theory conjectures that the missing gold reached the Pacific port of Vladivostok and then was lost at sea. Some speculate the gold was loaded onto a ship or barge that sank in Vladivostok's Golden Horn Bay before it could depart Russia. Geomagnetic surveys in 2017 did detect metal objects resembling rail containers in the bay, stirring talk of Kolchak's gold, though again nothing conclusive was found. At present, the true nature of the whereabouts of Kolchak's gold remains officially unknown, and the speculation surrounding the wealth will continue to fascinate for generations to come. In 1957, two amateur archaeologists digging in Brooklyn, Maine, uncovered a small silver coin caked in mud. The finders, Guy Melgren and Ed Rung, had no idea this little coin would spark decades of debate. They initially assumed it was a very old English penny, so it attracted little attention at first. The true significance of the discovery only became clear years later. The coin, now dubbed the Maine penny, was eventually identified as an authentic Viking Age artifact. In 1978, a photo of the coin in a local archaeological bulletin caught the attention of a London coin dealer who realized it was Norse, not English. Experts determined it to be an 11th century Norwegian silver penny from the reign of King Olaf III of Norway, who ruled from 1065 to 1093. News outlets worldwide picked up the story, and the Maine penny leapt from obscurity to fame as a tantalizing clue of possible further Viking presence in North America. Enthusiasts were quick to link the Maine penny to the voyages of Norse explorers. In 1960, archaeologists confirmed a Viking settlement in Newfoundland, a large island off the east coast of Canada. This was definitive proof that around 1000 AD, Norse explorers had reached North America and established a very modest outpost. Strong evidence suggests those Norse may have traveled as far south as modern New Brunswick in Canada, though some speculate there were much more extensive travels. Maine's coast is only about 100 nautical miles from New Brunswick, so reaching Maine wouldn't be a huge leap for sailors familiar with Atlantic coasts. Thus, finding an 11th century Norse coin in Maine seemed like thrilling evidence that Vikings might have stepped ashore in what's now the United States. At face value, the Maine penny promised to rewrite a chapter of history. If it were truly left behind by a Norse visitor, it would represent the first known confirmed European artifact from pre-Columbian times ever found in the United States. But many scholars urged caution at the time. The coin was unearthed by amateurs without proper records, and among some 30,000 artifacts recovered at the dig site, it was the only European object found. If Norsemen had been present, it's puzzling that no other trace of them turned up. This lone Norse coin amid a trove of Native American material made some experts suspect it was an anomaly rather than proof of a Viking landing. Many archaeologists today believe the Maine penny arrived in Maine through indigenous trade networks, not by a Viking landing. Native peoples of the North Atlantic region traded widely, so a Norse coin obtained in Newfoundland or Greenland could have been passed gradually from community to community. Archaeologists have dated the occupation layer of the site where the penny was found to roughly 1200 AD. This was a period well after the initial Vinland voyages, but within the era when Norse colonists still lived in Greenland. The dig site itself appears to have been a hub for far-reaching trade, according to archaeologists. For example, a tool from Arctic Canada was found there, indicating extreme long-distance exchanges. All this supports the idea that the coin is genuine and old, yet was brought to Maine by native traders. In this scenario, the artifact reflects Norse contact with North America, but not necessarily that Vikings personally visited Maine. Another possibility is fraud. History has seen several fake quote-unquote Norse finds in America, indicating the general fascination with the idea of Norsemen traveling to the region. Skeptics note that genuine Viking coins were available on the collector's market in the 1950s, and Mellgren was a coin enthusiast with potential access to such artifacts. Further, the finding came during a period of Viking sensationalism and hoaxes, which makes the timing of the find seem suspicious to some observers. All that said, there's absolutely nothing beyond very weak circumstantial evidence that the discovery was faked, but the circumstances leave room for potential doubt. Decades later, the Maine penny remains an intriguing, unsolved historical mystery. On one hand, it's undeniably an authentic Norse coin that somehow ended up in a pre-Columbian context on the coast of Maine. On the other hand, according to the academic consensus, a single stray coin in isolation isn't conclusive proof of a voyage.